most sinister dude in the business. Once again, it's the illest and realest killers, the most villainous. Dre protege, shady apprentice.
Guys, the floor is yours.
I
guess I get the first question. So I'm from Ezetap, we're a mobile payments company. You mentioned mobile payments earlier. There's been a lot of innovation and new companies in mobile payments in the last couple of years. I think Android is actually the game changer that will proliferate mobile payments in emerging markets. What trends and disruptions have you seen? How much is hype? And to the extent you can,
well, it makes intuitive sense that a couple billion people will use mobile payments because it's their only real access to banking.
Yeah.
Here in India, you have a courageous man, Nanda Nikalani, who's doing the identity system, and whose name I can't remember. What's the name of the identity system?
UID.
The UID. And so I met with him, and I've known him for a long time. And the ability to have a variable, viable identity, which is then tied into a payment system so that people can go and actually get the money, is brilliant, right? So what I don't know is I don't know what the competitive structure that you're operating in, how much do you need help from the banks versus will they try to compete with you? Now, I was in Kenya and looked at M-Pesa, which is hugely successful. But even M-Pesa did not have all of the things needed. For example, it did not have the right vendor-to-vendor connections. So there are now a set of startups that are now being created to build on top of the M-Pesa API exposure. So a couple of things I would suggest is try to figure out how much you need the banks and how to work with them, which is always hard. And the second thing is that everything you do, make sure you have an exposed API so that people can build on top of you. One of the ways in which you can become viral in a software sense is to become a platform or an intermediate layer that people then build on top of.
Perfect.
Hey, we're Mobstac. We're a mobile cloud for publishers.
Can you speak a little louder?
Sorry, is the mic?
Mobile cloud for publishers.
Mobile cloud for publishers. So we make it possible for publishers around the world to create mobile websites and mobile apps from our platform. You mentioned about, earlier you were talking about how, there's a huge mobile opportunity even in developing countries where people are going to go online primarily for mobile devices. But you've actually, seen the growth of the internet, being at Google back in, in 2000s. What are you seeing different about the mobile growth story? And what is it that companies like India, which are already seeing a lot of mobile innovation, companies like, Ezetap and all doing things first in mobile, what do you think we can learn from that? How can we
Well, the first thing is both of you are mobile first, which is the correct answer. So congratulations.
Great, thanks.
The second thing is that mobile users use their mobile devices differently in terms of queries and browsing and so forth than traditional PCs. The queries are more frequent, they're shorter, and they're much more location specific. So where am I, who am I, where am I going, what problem do I have right now? They're much more real time. And that, I think, changes the UI. We've had to now adjust our advertising units to have a new set of mobile advertising units. Many of our devices and our UIs are much more, at Google, are much more represent the trends that I described. We know that eventually people are addicted to their mobile phones. Try taking a mobile phone from one of your friends and see if you get hit. The mobile phone is very much, in fact, everyone here has a mobile phone. And all of you carry it and you sort of protect it. In fact, I understand that Indians have 2 SIM cards typically. So this is how sensitive people are to these sorts of things. So I think that bodes well. But the difference is it's much more personal. And that's both good and bad. It means you're also much more embedded in the person's lifestyle, and you have to worry about things like privacy and those sorts of things. But you also have much greater access.
Great, thanks.
Please. A couple more questions. Yes, sir.
So we are Practo. We build software for patients and doctors. With more Indian startups going global, one of the questions that I have is regarding patents. How should startups view patents? Should they look to create patents?
It's a mess. I don't know about the Indian patent system. How does it work here? Is it similar to the United States or different?
It's not as restrictive as the United States, but with more startups, kind of going from India to the United States and selling abroad, what are your views on patents worldwide? How should they be reformed?
I have a pretty harsh view of software patents. What happened in the 80s and 90s in the United States was that it was decided that software patents would be legal, and that was a dispute in and of itself. because software can be understood as an algorithm, and algorithms are not patentable. Nevertheless, that decision was made. And then there were quite a few patents that were granted without a very good understanding of prior art. So what's happened since then in America is that a set of companies, which are generally known as patent trolls, have emerged to try to extract the value of these patents. The problem is that in almost every case there's prior art, and they usually work for Google. So we find ourselves in a situation where we are constantly being sued over these things, and we almost always win. So that was the first step. The second step was that a number of companies, led by the telecommunications industry, decided to use patents to stop innovation. A notable example is that Apple sued Samsung in a number of courts to try to essentially not allow Samsung's products into the market. Now, I understand that there's a dispute over patents, but to deny people the actual choice, literally not, you can't even choose our product versus another, strikes me as completely unfair and very much not what the patent system was really about. So we've moved in America to a situation where companies, including Google, have very large numbers of patents and basically fight these patent wars, which I view as a real step back. Having said that, as long as you're not successful, it doesn't matter very much. So, right, in the sense that there's so much overlapping claims and so forth, I think it's more important to focus on becoming successful and then spending the time to get the key patents that you have filed. Because if you have strong patents, you're going to do just fine. The other thing, of course, is that if you ever find yourself in a patent dispute, there's plenty of American lawyers that will be quite happy to take your money to go discover, the prior art and so forth. Computer science has relatively few new ideas, I'm sorry to say. Many of them were invented in the 60s and 70s. And in many, many cases, there's a lot of prior art to the things which people are trying to patent now.
Hi, my name is Tanuj. I run Kindle. It's a marketplace for classes, courses, and experiences. It sits on an interest map layer. My question was actually about marketplaces in general, since you talked about the fact that there are not too many new ideas which are coming up in the tech space. So where do you see marketplaces for consumers in specific moving, especially given the fact that data monsters like Google and Facebook are creating massive entry barriers for such marketplaces? An example could be an Airbnb.
I'm a little confused by what marketplaces you mean.
So this would be a place where a service provider and somebody who's seeking a service can actually connect on the web. So that would.
But I think we'll see lots of Airbnb kinds of players. I mean, Google is not trying to be a sort of a big player in that space. We're much more interested in the data infrastructure and empowering it. Google has something called Google Compute Engine, which we think is going to be a very strong competitor to the Amazon Web Services. And I think a lot of people will build the kind of marketplaces you're describing on top of the Google infrastructure. It makes sense to me that every market I'll give you a simple diagnostic. Every industry that does not have software architects at the middle of it is open for your marketplace idea. In every case, a software architect in the middle of that marketplace can make it more efficient, more transparent, scale faster, better pricing signals, and so forth. There are many examples of markets where people don't want that to happen. My classic example is art. The last thing you want to do is have accurate, transparent pricing about art, because art is all about who bought it and what the price was. But for traditional markets, ball bearings and tires and distribution markets, it makes perfect sense to have the kind of marketplaces that you're describing. And because of the internet, you can build these global marketplaces that scale very, very quickly. A classic example in America is Yelp, right? And there are plenty of examples. And I'm sure that every one of those, if you just look at all the ones in the US, there'll be one of every one of those in India 5 times larger. More questions are coming.
We'll go around.
Oh, sure.
I'm interested, what are the few key metrics you tracked early on versus now, and actually, were they consistent from Novell to Google? So how?
What I learned at Novell was to focus on cash. I never really understood accounting, because I never went to business school. But there were plenty of smart people who understood accounting, but I understood cash.
Yeah.
So when I joined Google, I was quite convinced that nobody was clicking on these ads,
Yeah.
and so which was wrong. So I asked to see the cash accounts to see the people who were actually paying.
Yeah.
And I found that if you run a sales force based on cash, how much cash are you collecting and so forth. Now, for innovators like here in the room, in fact, I'll give you I now teach at business school at Stanford, but I'll give you my simple rule. It's called DNR-OOC. Do not run out of cash. Right? This is not that complicated. Let me repeat, DNR-OOC. What is the most important thing you can do? Yeah. Figure out a way to get cash coming in. Right? Because cash is life. And by the way, the accountants will handle revenue accounting, expense accounting, depreciation, which I now understand a little bit better than I used to. So once you get one of these platforms, you can make money from them. Yeah. So a simple rule is if you have an audience of 1 billion people, you can monetize that. Yeah. It's not that you can always find a way to bring some amount of value for such an audience. So figure out a way to get that audience, figure out a way to get some cash, and focus on the cash collection. And because, again, the fact of the matter is you have to build the infrastructure. You have to pay for the servers, you have to pay for the bandwidth, et cetera.
Did you get involved in usage, how did you segregate that between you and Larry and Sergey?
Well, the three of us worked as a team. Larry and Sergey were always ahead of me, so I was always the last one. So they would always see a product idea or a focus, but my job was to keep everything organized. Right. And I think that's a nice partnership. And another piece of advice is if you can find yourself a partner in business life, it's a great thing. Because although Larry and Sergey and I have had very many strong arguments, there's never been a time when I had any question as to their loyalty to the company and vice versa. Yeah. We were all fighting for the corporation and for what its values and beliefs were. And having a partner that is so embedded with you in business is a delight. It means somebody you can talk with and you can trust. And I would always want, if I were to do something else, although Google is my home today, but if I were to advise you, I'd find yourself people like that and live with them and die with them in terms of the arguments, understanding that you're completely aligned. Yeah. It's just a great human thing.
Yeah. Thanks.
More questions?
Yeah, actually, I was, what you just said, it looks like I got that part right because I co-founded with my friend Sharath and schoolmate from 5th grade, Excellent. All the way to IIT Madras, all the way to graduate school in the US, roommates in New York, and now we're in business together at Mobstac.
And now you're getting divorced because you're tired of it.
Actually, somebody told me when you pick a co-founder, there's no getting divorced.
That's right. Yeah. By the way, that's actually true. It's also true of venture capital investors.
Yeah. That also, yes.
But you see, that's exactly what I'm talking about. This is somebody who you can have an argument with,
right.
And there's complete trust. How are we going to do this? And these are intense times. These are not easy decisions. There's no playbook. There's no simple way to answer the tough questions that you're going to face.
Absolutely.
Another piece of advice that I learned from Larry is focus on recruiting. Most companies don't really lay off people, and especially the early people you hire tend to set the culture. Google is now a very large corporation, but the culture was set by the first 10, 20, 30 people. And they were slightly kooky and slightly fun and so forth coming out of Stanford and Berkeley, and that culture pervades today. Yeah. You were asking a question.
Yeah, no. My question really is related to, just from the ecosystem standpoint, from the startup ecosystem standpoint. One thing we've seen about the Silicon Valley ecosystem is there's a very healthy level of M&A. And there's a lot of acquisitions and all happening. And that really spurs innovation because there are options in terms of exits. And that's something I think Google did a lot in the beginning, even before you guys went public and all that. So what is your perspective on what it takes to get like an M&A ecosystem going, and more importantly, how is Google thinking about acquisitions outside Silicon Valley, perhaps in countries like India? Because that's something that
the Google answer is easy. We tend to acquire companies for talent that we don't have. So we price it as basically talent plus a immediacy premium. So we get the engineers and we get the savings of the 6 months or 12 months or whatever versus building ourselves, and that's the economics that we do. And the vast majority of acquisitions are like that. The question that you're really asking is a variant of the Silicon Valley question. How do you get an ecosystem going? And it comes from the things I discussed earlier. Location of very smart technical people, probably near top universities, a venture capital structure, an ability to fail in the form and not be thrown in jail, right? So the ability to, for example, go bankrupt is not a crime, and you can start again and restart often. That's the best way to learn. And you also need some success stories. because success brings more money in. So we need a number of Indian entrepreneurs, ideally people here in this room, who become fabulously successful and fabulously wealthy. You'd be very happy with that, by the way. But more importantly, that kind of drives the envy-greed cycle, right? Brings more money in, brings more entrepreneurs, people, brings in that competition. India is a crowded place. It seems to me that people here compete pretty hard for the top jobs, the top jobs in politics, top jobs in business, top jobs in school. I think the culture will then produce the very best ideas out of it. So I'm not worried about that. You have enough people, you have enough of a focus, you have enough of a domestic market. Even if the rest of the world went away, you'd be able to do that here in India. More questions? Yes, sir.
So there are a lot of founders who become the CEOs. Would love to get your views on what is the difference between a good CEO and a great CEO. And you've seen a lot of CEOs. So who are the top three in your mind?
Well, a simple answer is that Steve Jobs is by far the most impressive human being I've ever worked with. Complicated person, obviously now deceased. Complicated person, complicated personally, complicated professionally, but was able to command a vision to change the world and to do so while running a large corporation with all the pressures. So one of the sort of core characteristics of great leaders is that they actually see what's going to happen ahead of everybody else, and they have either the communication skills, whether it's being nice or being mean or what have you, they somehow get it laid out and people believe them. I was on the board of Apple for 3 years, so I can speak with authority as how it worked. People loved working for Steve, right? Because they knew they were going to get there. So he's a good example. I personally believe Larry Page will be an equivalent as he grows into that role, because he has that vision and people just love his vision and so forth. There are others. But all of the great tech CEOs had the property that they combined sort of a true visionary passion for what they were doing and the ability to get people excited about it through whatever mechanism. They were seen as serious people trying to change the world. So if you can't articulate why you're changing the world, then maybe you should get a different CEO, right? You've got to believe it. And it's not something that you can learn. It comes from within. A general rule in venture is that entrepreneurs are born. They're not trained. There are some exceptions. But usually these people break out pretty early. You can tell. They're different from the rest of us. I, for example, am not an entrepreneur. I'm a professional manager who happens to like to work with entrepreneurs.
So one question I had was, you've seen Google from a small room where you had a corner desk to where it is right now. What has really set Google apart from its competitors? I mean, whether it's in search and many other tools. What are the 2-3 things which you think have been the most important factors which have sort of created this huge rift between competition and a Google?
The biggest difference is probably the quality of the technical people. For whatever set of reasons, Google was able to get the very best computer scientists in each of these areas. And so the solutions had architectures that scaled faster and that were more flexible. So, for example, with Android, there were many choices, but Android won out because the technology was just better. In search, I think everyone would now agree that the search algorithms that Google has are just better. These are things that we invented. And there were plenty of other people who tried to copy it, but they just weren't as good. And so I don't know how to say it in any other way to sound arrogant. But I'm very, very proud of that. And again, this goes back to Larry and Sergey's focus on hiring the smartest people. It's extremely difficult to get a job at Google. I can't imagine I would pass the test today that we now apply. But we test people thoroughly. We push them very, very hard. And people like that. And I would encourage you in your company, how do you know that you've got the best people working on your problem? Is it because they were your roommate or your best friend or your friend's friend or somebody you worked with in your last company? That's a terrible answer. Why don't you try to figure out who the smartest people are to solve your problem and try to convince them to join you. Right. And by the way, with really smart people, you can't yell at them because they'll just say, well, screw you. I'll just do my own thing. Right. They will respond to an appeal of logic, appeal of destiny, an appeal of reason. What I like about India, by the way, is you have it right in front of you, right? You've got 10% penetration. You've got all sorts of societal illnesses in terms of poverty and education and entertainment and medical issues, right? So you've got plenty of arguments for why mobile payments, for example, I'll pick any one of you. You've got plenty of emotional arguments that will motivate people to want to work with you. And I suspect that the other firms here have exactly the same thing. There's nobody here who's looking at a small market in terms of impact. Ultimately, people care about, one of the things that is a mistake that's made in the press and in business school is people assume that people care mostly about money or power. My experience is that people care about impact. And that if they feel that they're having personal impact on the world, they will work very hard. But if you treat them poorly and you restrict what they're doing and you sort of hold them down or you just order them around, they'll say, well, you know, whatever. They won't work that hard. You don't want those people. You want them emotionally motivated. And the great thing about the startups, by the way, is that you can tell a hot startup because the people are working all the time, and when you talk to them, you feel that energy. And that's not an energy that they were paid to have. It came from their soul.
So, Eric, I know that you're very busy, so thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all. It was fun to meet all of you. And I guess thank you to the audience as well.
Yes, so thank you for joining. Eric, you are here today with us at a time where we are, after this, launching a very major initiative.
Yes, I know. We're through Nasscom.
And we hope that with the partnerships that we have with all the companies here and everything that's going on, we are going to be able to incubate, energize a lot of new startups to make it happen.
Oh, this is great.
So I didn't want to miss this photo opportunity with you, where today...
Well, and Nasscom, of course, has been very helpful. From my perspective, focusing on innovation and making this ecosystem happen helps the country, it helps the society, it helps make a lot of money, and it certainly helps Google. So thank you so much for all of that.
So just stand here for us with me. So this is our logo for the